case and a proposal pivot plan. So one of our earlier videos, we had talked about prioritizing impact and the importance of impact when funding initiatives are completed. A key outcome from that discussion was the only thing that really mattered when you completed a proposal is whether it created impact or not. Did the aggregation of the funding that was distributed from a funding round actually create a positive return on investment or not? And with that discussion, we kind of also went through how it doesn't really matter if a funded proposal pivots or not. The only really truly important outcome is did that end result create impact? As a video that's worth watching. The second video that we also done recently was talking about some of the issues and blockers we faced when trying to execute some of the proposals we've got funded for that are targeted at improving the Catalyst ecosystem. Some of the first issues and blockers were around making Catalyst tools where they've been more difficult to do due to data availability, and that's kind of like read and write access, so we can kind of become more integrated into kind of making solutions in the process. And one of the other areas of concern and issue for us was around some of the identity infrastructure. So that's having reference implementations for wallets and also making sure everything follows the DID spec fully. Both of those problems are starting to be resolved over time, but they've been ongoing issues for us executing a lot of Catalyst-focused proposals. Some of the second areas of concern and issues for us have been around the lack of community stewardship and control over decisions and process changes. As an example, for some of our previous proposals, we've completed, for instance, the funding categorization and analysis work, and we will present that work to IOG. And some of that work was taken on board and has been adopted, whereas other parts, such as the contributor funding model, which we presented in a separate presentation, and the merits of it, was completely ignored. So the IOG company has no obligation or mandate to respond to, give feedback, or do anything to respond to what's going on in the community. Is completely at their own discretion, and they make the decisions. Now, if you're prioritizing making impact when trying to improve that ecosystem specifically, if you have that kind of dependency and you don't have the agency to make those changes or have a process to follow, then it's very easy that you become blocked, and the very impact you're trying to provide is not realized. So this has been a massive issue for us and something that we're trying to mitigate moving forward. In terms of even if these previous issues get resolved, we have had these ongoing concerns about whether creating tools in the Catalyst environment was going to be actually truly impactful. And in fact, we kind of really identified that those tools were going to be most likely higher risk in actually achieving the creation of that impact. So for instance, we saw it would be easy to increase the tech stack complexity by making separate solutions. That would also likely introduce security integration concerns by increasing the amount of solutions, completely independent solutions available. You would increase the disjointed user experience into a process that is already very complex by itself, going through Catalyst. That if you have lots of independent kind of tool solutions created, then it'd be very easy for them not to be funded in a single round and then not have that support and maintenance. And then also we had a massive concern about just having this duplicate efforts and solutions, of having lots of different similar solutions that are achieving the same thing, but they're only testing a small little part. And that just leads to a lot of wasted effort and high cost to kind of maintain and improve that tool itself. So with that in mind, we've started to see that some of these issues and blocks are starting to be resolved, which is great, but we still have this ongoing concern that making tools, Catalyst tools specifically for some of our proposals, isn't likely the right approach considering the environment and the risks it faces in terms of actually kind of establishing and creating impact. We've also had a lot of increased reflection based on our experience of working within Catalyst and some of our proposals that we have completed on how we can create impact and do so on a more consistent basis. So with that in mind, recently we've been sharing the Web3 Association, which has been a potential solution to all of the issues we've been facing within Catalyst as a new approach. And the key problem we're trying to address is how can we more effectively support and improve treasury systems and consistently create impactful outcomes and try and remove some of these blockers and things that prevent us from really realizing that potential. And it's from our experience that we believe that creating knowledge resources with insightful and actionable information to support teams building treasury systems across Web3 ecosystems will help to achieve that goal. So as a good example of that, some of our work for the funding categorization analysis would be an example of a knowledge-based resource that was provided that kind of level of impact that is also applicable to multiple ecosystems. Although that piece of work was targeted at the Catalyst ecosystem, and when we were doing the research and analysis, the lessons learned in the analysis from that outcome can actually also be applied to other layer one ecosystems and also applications who need to manage their own treasury. So that was the key kind of inspiring kind of inflection point where we realized actually we can provide even more impact for many places with the same work, and we're also not blocked in the process. In terms of the reasons to adopt this approach, the key thing that we kind of learned there is that we don't need to compete with the technical solutions that have all of those risks I mentioned previously to solve these impactful treasury problems. Instead, we can see ourselves as like a supporting organization and group of contributors towards these ecosystems, such as Catalyst. And if we adopt this kind of approach where we create knowledge resources to solve these problems, we kind of completely remove all of those issues and blockers we mentioned before. So instead, when we provide some of this analysis around improving funding categorization or something similar, we can provide that to each of the Treasury teams, and it is at their own discretion and timing of when they want to consider or potentially adopt some of those solutions. And even if they do not adopt those solutions, it is not a concern, because if another solution adopts something, then they will learn from other teams who are adopting different solutions and learn from the data and outcomes from that experimentation. In terms of some of the other key benefits to consider and why this approach makes sense moving forward, well, one of the first ones is if we are helping to aggregate and bring together the data and the learnings and the outcomes from the different approaches being taken from the different ecosystems, then we're going to help to be able to easily share some of those learnings from each ecosystems to each of the others, which will help to increase the speed of learning. Each of those ecosystems will benefit from seeing what's going on, what's working and what isn't, and what opportunities exist. The second benefit is it can help to be more cost effective. So if each of the ecosystems are supporting this initiative, then you help to share the cost of each of the contributors that are helping to establish and create these kind of knowledge resources, so it doesn't cost them the full amount to have to pay for those contributors in isolation. It also will help with reducing the duplicated and wasted effort. So now, instead of ecosystems working independently and duplicating all of the same work to do the research analysis, understanding what approaches they could take, what data exists, and all of this extra effort, now they can use and adopt all of the kind of knowledge resources that are being created by this approach we're suggesting, and then use it at their own kind of leisure and decide when and how they want to interact with both the resources and also the contributors that are helping to create it, which helps them to focus more on just the execution of their own system and consider all of the different angles that they could be approaching the problem. The next benefit would be around inspiring new solution approaches. So if we're hoping to bring together everything that's going on across the industry, it's going to help it make it a lot easier to understand all the different approaches that are working and not working at the moment, and some of the different approaches that aren't even being considered. And with all of that information, it's going to help to inspire different teams to consider how they may want to tackle a problem differently, and in other cases where just they're going to adopt something that is clearly working very well. So the end result of that is hopefully we're going to end up with more experimentation and identification of which approaches and which things are worth further exploring. And then finally, if you have a group of contributors who are helping to try and bring together all this information and provide all this analysis, then they can help with identifying these common shared problems and trying to increase the collaboration, whether that's just communication, it's events, it's meetups, all the way through to even supporting some of the solution architecture and what could be created for the benefit of all of these ecosystems. So any way that collaboration can be increased to help save cost and time and effort from each of these ecosystems, we can help to support. Ultimately, any success with this approach with one ecosystem is a win for all other ecosystems. If some knowledge resources help to lead to any changes within one ecosystem, the results and outcomes from those changes in that one ecosystem can be shared and propagated to the other ecosystems. And one ecosystem could be very conservative and say, we're not willing to try X and Y different approach, but if another ecosystem does, then they're going to get lessons and learnings from those different experimentations going on elsewhere that we can help to easily present and tell them what exactly is happening and what was the success and failures in those different experiments. Ultimately, we think this shared learning will help to speed up that Web3 adoption, as it will help to increase the rate of learning across each of these treasury systems and increase the rate that they can experiment and adopt kind of effective approaches. Which leads us to this kind of ultimate belief that treasuries really are a flywheel growth lever for the adoption of Web3. If a treasury system is effective at directing funds in impactful initiatives, those impactful initiatives should be effective at helping to expand and grow an ecosystem to make it more valuable, which in turn helps to increase the value of the treasury, which then in turn can go back into being invested into impactful initiatives. So this loop helps to create a flywheel growth lever for ecosystems if they can continuously keep improving their treasury system. So with that in mind, how are we going to migrate some of our existing proposals over to this new approach? Now, we have a few existing proposals that we've got completed, such as the education resources from Fund 5 and the funding categories analysis that help to actually us identify this kind of opportunity to work in this kind of manner. We have the collaborators list that we've mostly completed and it's going to be due for completion soon. We'll do a report at the end of this month. And then we have the funding categorization analysis work that we kind of extended. We did more work beyond that proposal that for now we're parking and we're going to give it, kick that can down the road as we're more fully focused on the Web3 Association work. So we're not going to request funding for that completed work for the minute. We're happy to take that one on the chin. And also, we're also happy, you know, like we completed some of these Fund 5 proposals now because we were blocked. We've been blocked from those previous blockers that we mentioned. And although the price of the aid has gone down and we've received less actual end-up funding, obviously we're absolutely fine with that. We're just taking that on the chin. That's just we can't really. That's just kind of how that kind of unfolded. So moving forward, we have 3 of those proposals that we've then put into a Fund 10 proposal that we're going to pivot. Now, even if that proposal is funded or not, we're still going to execute those proposals and pivot them. And we've already, in some of our documentation, we've kind of went through all the details of why we're kind of really covering similar kind of outcomes within the Web3 Association approach and achieving similar outcomes. And we've already kind of previously discussed why creating tools is very high risk. There's actually, you know, a very high chance we do not create impact from doing that part of the execution. So a lot of these proposals are very well suited to being pivoted to an improved approach. Now, that doesn't speak for all of the proposals. So we've got the remaining 6 then that we're not going to necessarily pivot at the moment, but they have all the options available to them. So in the future, we'll see what makes most sense. One of the options could be to return the funds fully to Treasury for some of them. So at the moment, that's not possible. Unfortunately, that's something we talked about in one of our previous videos. It would be great for that to become available because we you know, there's no reason to block people from being able to return funds to the Treasury. If they're not spending Treasury funds, that's not a risk to the Treasury. It's important that that process eventually becomes available. Another thing is we can gradually pivot them into the W3A proposals like we've kind of started to try and do. We could reallocate some of that budget to other similar projects. Now, of course, we'd set a very high bar for that. Like we'd have to make sure that the intentions of those other projects meets a similar kind of outcome and that they ultimately were going to make impact. That's the main thing. It's like if we were going to reallocate elsewhere, we have to be sure that, you know, the outcomes there would help to make impact. And then finally, of course, we could still execute some of them. And that's definitely applicable for some of the credential ones, as for instance, if a contributor model was introduced at some point, then a credential, any efforts to support kind of a credential for that area we think would be highly impactful, or potentially if a skill pops up that would be useful for the skills credential proposal, then of course we will try to pursue and execute that. So we'll make sure we are aligned with making impact before we decide exactly what makes sense for some of those other ones, but we already have a plan and backup with pivoting to make sure that we provide impact with this new approach moving forward. So as I mentioned, I've kind of covered some of the pivot plan in more details in our own docs. And if you want to find out more about the Web3 Association work and how we're approaching that, from the outcomes to just kind of this kind of approach to encourage shared learning, then that's all documented there as well. I will also do some videos in the future that cover the Web3 Association in more details, and I'll be doing a lot of content for that in the upcoming weeks and months as I start work on that area. And that's it. Thank you for listening, guys.